of the United States.
Thank you all. Thank you all for coming. Thank you. Thanks for coming today. Please be seated. We got a lot of work to do here. Thank you for such a warm greeting, and I want to thank some of our fellow citizens for joining me here on the stage. We're about to have an interesting conversation on a vital issue that confronts our country, and that has to do with asbestos litigation. And I want to thank you all for joining us. I think you're going to find their stories to be very interesting and very compelling as to why this country needs to act and to solve a problem. I mean, one of the reasons people run for office, or at least the main reason they run for office, should be to see problems and solve problems so that the country is better off because of our actions. I want to thank Al Lorenzo and the good folks here at Macomb Community College for allowing us to use your beautiful facility. I believe that the community college system is a vital part of making sure that America remains a competitive place to do business. After all, one of the ways to ensure that our business sector is strong and viable is to have a workforce that is skilled, that is trained for the skills of the 21st century. And there is no better place than the community college system of America to provide those skills for jobs which actually exist. So thanks for having us here. I'm honored to be here today. I traveled from Washington on mighty Air Force One with 4 members of the United States Congress from Michigan. I hope they came down to hear this presentation. I suspect they might have liked the accommodations. But I'm proud of all 4. Congressman Mike Rogers is with us today. Thank you, Mike. Thad McCotter is with us. Congressman, thank you for coming. Joe Nolenberg is with us. Congressman Nolenberg. And finally, Congresswoman Candace Miller has joined us. Thank you, Candace. Sounds like they've heard of you. That's good. And you brought along husband Don. I appreciate Don. Don and I visited about flying F-102s together. I appreciate you all coming. I want to thank all the state and local officials who are here. I want to thank our fellow citizens who've joined us. Today, when I landed at the air base, I met Colonel Don Kochman, who's with us today. Don, thank you for coming. You know, I appreciate Don wearing our nation's uniform, but more importantly, I appreciate the fact that he is a Boy Scout leader. He is and the reason I like to herald a person like Don is because the true strength of the country is the heart and souls of the American citizens. That's our strength. I mean, our military is mighty, and we'll keep it that way. Our economy is getting better, and we intend to keep it that way. But the real strength of this country is the fact that thousands and thousands of our citizens take time out of their lives to try to make somebody else's life better. And I want to appreciate you for being a volunteer, a soldier in the Army of Compassion, Colonel. And I want to, again, I want for all of you out there who are looking for some way to serve your community and our country, love your neighbor like you'd like to be loved yourself, and you'll be doing our country a great service. Speaking about a nation, a loving nation providing care, I met with my little brother last night, the governor of Florida, Jeb, who just had come back from the part of the world that was affected by the tsunamis. I'll be talking to Colin Powell on Monday. Jeb tells me of the extraordinary efforts that are being made on behalf of the suffering people by our aid workers and most particularly by our United States military. We've got you know, we're good fighters, but we're also incredibly compassionate people, and our military is flying chopper lift after chopper lift after chopper lift to get needed supplies to help alleviate the incredible suffering that has gone on. I am proud of the efforts we have made. I will be proud of the efforts we will make, because this compassionate country will help those around the world who hurt as a result of these natural disasters. We have a lot to do besides relieving suffering around the world. We've got to spread freedom. I mean, one way to relieve suffering is to encourage people to be free. And on my mind right now is the fact that the people of Iraq will be voting on January the 30th. I was asked today about the... I want to thank our military and the military families for making this vote possible. I was asked today about, all different aspects of the upcoming vote. They were talking about turnout. I said, I know something about turnout. In democracy, we think about turnouts. And so I'm excited for the people of Iraq. I'm excited for the fact that they are going to have a chance to go to the polls. It's an amazing accomplishment. And again, I want to thank our troops and those on the ground there who are helping this historic moment to arrive. You probably have read where we have sent some military folks over to assess the situation there. What we have done is we've sent military people over to assess how we can help the newly elected government after January 30th do their job of helping to train their people so they can protect themselves against the few who want to stop the march of democracy in that part of the world. And so this year we will do everything we can to help the Iraqis assume the responsibilities necessary to defeat those who want to stop the good people of that country from being able to exercise their free will. We'll do everything we can to protect our homeland. At home, we've got some good economic news today. There's a net job increase, or new job increase of 157,000 jobs for December. I said 159,000 in the Oval Office. I stand corrected. It was 157,000 new jobs for December, which is good news. More and more people are finding work, and the fundamental question confronting the administration and the Congress is, what do we do to continue to expand the economic growth here in the country? And I've got some ideas on what to do, and I look forward to working with the Congress to see that those ideas come to fruition. One is we've got to be wise about how we spend your money. It's essential in the budgets that I propose and the budget that Congress passes that it is very clear that we understand that in order to make sure there's confidence in our economy, that we cut the deficit in half over 5 years. And I look forward to working with the spenders in Congress to do just that. I'm confident we need to keep taxes low. One of the reasons why our small business sector is so vibrant and strong today is because taxes on small businesses have been lowered. We intend to keep them low in this administration. I know we've got to do a better job of getting Congress to pass an energy plan. We must become less dependent on foreign sources of energy if we expect this economy to continue to grow. And another thing we need to do is to make sure that we tackle big problems, like the Social Security problem. We have a problem with Social Security, and it's this. The number of payers paying into the system are dwindling on an annual basis, so that by the time baby boomers like me get ready to receive the promise of the government, there's not going to be enough money in the system. And so I'm saying to Congress, let's fix it now. We have a duty, it seems like to me, to confront problems. I look forward with working with the Congress, members of both parties, to show our country we can confront big problems. I don't have a specific plan. I'm listening to all ideas. Everything that should be on the table as far as I'm concerned, except for the following. One, people who are retired or near retirement should see nothing changed in the system. And part of the problem with dealing with Social Security is that it's been a way for some to scare seniors. They look, if they modernize the system, the seniors won't get the checks. Forget it. You're going to get your check. Nothing will change. I'm talking about how we deal with the problem for younger workers, most of whom think they'll never see anything to begin with. And I believe we can do so without running up payroll taxes. And I believe one interesting change, one innovative response to this issue is to allow younger workers to take some of their own money and set it aside in a personal savings account that'll earn a better rate of return than the money inside the Social Security Trust, an account they can call their own. All right. Way to make sure America is the best place to do business in the world, way to make sure jobs continue to exist here, is to tackle the tough issues of legal reform. And we have too many junk lawsuits in our system, pure and simple. And frivolous and junk lawsuits cost our economy about $240 billion a year. That's a problem. We are one of the most, I think maybe the most litigious society in the industrialized world, which is a competitive disadvantage that we have in a global economy. And therefore, in order to make sure jobs stay here and jobs are increased here, we must be more competitive. And in order to be so, it seems like to me it makes sense to reform our legal systems. I'm calling on Congress to address three issues as to legal reform. One is to make sure that there's available and affordable health care by reforming medical liability law. There's too many lawsuits around this country that are driving too many good doctors out of practice, that are driving up the cost of medicine. The cost of practicing defensive medicine in order to stay out of the courthouse or to provide the defense necessary in case of a frivolous lawsuit is costing you $28 billion a year at the federal level, and it's a problem. And I look forward to working with Congress to solve this medical liability issue. We need to reform the class action lawsuit problem. I mean, these lawsuits are being filed. They have an impact on our economy. They many times the lawyers get the money and the people don't. They are these suits that have got interstate claimants really ought to be in the federal court. The system right now allows people to shop for a court of law that is convenient to their case, or a place where they can find a sympathetic jury. And I think in order to make sure the system works better, Congress needs to reform the class action lawsuit provisions of law and enable claimants to be able to argue their case in a federal court of law as opposed to a sympathetic local court of law. And finally, we're here to talk about asbestos lawsuits. We got a problem. The Supreme Court recognized it as a problem. He said it is a huge mass of asbestos cases defies customary judicial administration and calls for national legislation. That's better that they define it than me. After all, these are all lawyers and judges. I'm not. But when they say the Supreme Court says we have a national problem, I think Congress needs to listen. And why is it a national problem? Well, first of all, we're spending about $80 billion on asbestos litigation, and that could end up being $200 billion over time. Secondly, these asbestos suits have bankrupted a lot of companies, and that affects the workers here in Michigan and around the country. Thirdly, those with no major mental impairment now make up the vast majority of claims, while those who are truly sick are denied their day in court. We'll hear a little bit about that. We'll hear more about that a little bit later. It's most of the asbestos producers are now bankrupt, so that lawyers target companies once considered too small to sue or once considered to be not really directly involved with the manufacturing of asbestos because there's nobody else to sue. They try to drag in people that aren't directly involved with the manufacturing of asbestos. We'll hear about what that means here as well. This is a national problem, as the Supreme Court said, that requires a national solution. And we're here today to talk about the national problem. I look forward to working with Congress to create a national solution. There are some principles which I think ought to govern Congress's actions. First, funds should be concentrated on those who are sick, not lawyers or claimants who are not ill. In other words, people have been affected by asbestos. There's no doubt about it. You'll hear a story here today about a loved one whose family suffered as a result of that. But most of the money isn't going to those people who've been truly sick. It's going to people who think they might be sick. And that hurts the system. Secondly, we need to speed up the process for delivering justice to deserving victims. So as Congress considers what ought to be done, they need to keep in mind those who have been truly harmed by asbestos. Third, we need to provide certainty in the system, which will help save jobs and protect businesses that had nothing to do with creating the asbestos problem. And that's important. And so as Congress moves, and I'm confident we can get something done. We'll, of course, need your help. I intend to help by keeping this issue on the front burner. And we got some citizens up here who want to help today, too. And we're going to start by hearing from Lester Brickman. Lester, tell them what you do.
I'm a law professor at the Benjamin N. Cardozo School of Law at Yeshiva University, and I write extensively on the issue of asbestos litigation.
So what he just said is he's going to give you an expert. I gave you a layman's opinion about all this. He's going to give you an expert opinion about all this. Tell us what the problem is. Tell us, just give us a little history and educate people.
Mr. President, asbestos litigation, actually asbestos exposure, has been a national tragedy, and more than 100,000 workers have died as a consequence of asbestos exposure. But lawyers have taken this tragedy and turned it into an enormous money-making machine in which, as you say, baseless claims predominate. In the year 2003, 105,000 new claimants came into the asbestos litigation system. Each claimant will sue 40, 50, 60, 70 different companies. So we're talking about a total of 50, 60, 70 million new claims generated just in the year 2003. Of this 105,000, approximately 10,000 are seriously ill, some dying, some dead, because of asbestos exposure. These are the malignancies. But more than 90,000 of these claimants have no illness related to asbestos exposure as recognized by medical science. These are truly meritless claims. Nonetheless, they're supported by medical testimony from a handful of medical experts routinely selected by plaintiff lawyers who are not acting in good faith in terms of supplying diagnoses, but are in fact responding to enormous financial incentives, which is to say millions of dollars in fees that they generate for reading the x-rays in the right way. These meritless claims are also supported by the activities of screening companies hired by the plaintiff lawyers who administer pulmonary function tests which fail to adhere to medical standards and produce false evidence of lung impairment. And finally, these meritless claims are supported by false witness testimony. Witnesses in asbestos litigation, including claimants, are prepared to testify by their lawyers. It's a remarkable fact that every time a company goes bankrupt, the witness testimony about what their exposure was, what products they were exposed to, immediately shifts to inculpate new defendants, new deep pockets. I have written about this extensively, and I've called it in subornation of perjury. You would think that subornation of perjury would be found to be unethical. Nonetheless, rules of legal ethics simply don't apply to asbestos litigation. The courts simply do not apply any rules of legal ethics to asbestos litigation. The consequence is that we've had, out of approximately 850,000 claimants since asbestos litigation began, perhaps 600,000 of these are largely baseless claims. Nonetheless, they have generated tens of billions of dollars in payments and billions of dollars in fee income for lawyers, which is why they're brought.
Right.
And this is a national tragedy.
I think my state of Texas was pretty famous for being a place where people would file these suits. As a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, we might have had 4, 5, 6,000 lawsuits dumped on a local court at a time from around the country.
That is correct. Lawsuits from around the country used to be filed in Texas, even though the plaintiffs never had set foot in Texas, even though the alleged injury had nothing to do with Texas, took place miles away or hundreds of thousands of miles away. But the Texas courts in those days, before tort reform, was...
I'm hoping you'd bring that up. Kind of leading the witness here. No. But it's happening in another state.
The law reform that you championed in Texas actually has spread to other states. And
yes.
That's a good thing.
And the reason I was going to bring it up is that when you have that many suits filed, it makes it hard for somebody who's got a legitimate claim to have their day in court. That's what we want. We want a court system that's fair. We want the scales of justice to be balanced, and the scales of justice are not balanced.
One of the effects of this massive specious claiming is that people, the true victims of asbestos exposure, the malignancies, have had their compensation delayed, and in many cases they have had inadequate compensation because so much money has gone to pay these baseless claims generated by lawyer self-interest. 70 companies have gone into bankruptcy. 8,500 different companies have already been sued. Hundreds of companies more will go into bankruptcy unless Congress acts to take asbestos litigation out of the courts and create some kind of administrative process funded by industry to pay these claims.
Yeah. And people need to understand, when they go into bankruptcy, that's a legal term, but people are losing jobs, which is a real human tragedy. That's what these lawsuits are causing. We've got some small business owners with us today. I think you'll find their stories sad and compelling. Bruce McPhee, that would be you.
Well, thank you, Mr.
Thanks for
President.
coming.
It's an honor to be here.
First, tell us about your company.
Well, first of all, we have a plant in Michigan, and it manufactures air compressors, and they have a second plant in New Hampshire named Sullivan Palatech Inc., also a manufacturer of air compressors.
Okay, good. And you're the president of the company?
I'm the president, yes.
Mr. President. And so why are you here?
Well, that's a good question. I believe the reason I am here is because we have been named in asbestos lawsuits due to a mistaken identity. We're being sued for things that we never made. We're being sued for things we never did.
Yeah, give the people a little history of your company, because this is a typical story as a result of these frivolous lawsuits.
Well, just to give you a little background, first of all, I'm a Michigan person. I've lived all my life in Michigan. And about 20 years ago, I went to work for this air compressor company just north of Lansing, Michigan. It's got about 35 employees, so it's a small business. I've been in charge of it since 1990. In 1998, we had the opportunity to buy another air compressor manufacturing company, and it was located in New Hampshire. It had a complementary line of products, so it made a lot of sense at the time. The people we bought it from had founded the company in 1988 or 1988, and I think that the date of 1988 is key because it shows what happens in the lawsuits. In the year 2001, or just about 3 years ago, we got our first set of asbestos lawsuits, and it's now gone up to 53 asbestos lawsuits, all for the same type of thing. I ought to mention that all of these lawsuits have been filed in states where we don't do any business, or we don't have a place of business, I should say. Pennsylvania, Maryland, Illinois. So we have no employees there, and then we have to work with their state court rules, find local attorneys that are licensed there, and it's just a terrible problem.
right? And so what is the rationale for suing you?
Well, what we found out, the first set of lawsuits was sort of interesting because one of them, the fellow, the dates that he had been exposed to asbestos was 1947 to 1953, and most of the other people had a similar thing. Well, from 1953 to the year we were founded, 1988, there's a 35-year gap. We couldn't possibly have made anything that because we weren't in business. A second thing, we were an air compressor company, and we were named for a Sullivan tugger, and some of that information came out. After doing some research into the industry, all we were able to locate was that there had been a company in New Hampshire that was named Sullivan Machine Company, and it closed in 1946, but we think they may have made the tuggers, and I have no idea, whether they had asbestos or not. I mean, all I can do is...
How many employees you got?
We've got a little over 100.
Yeah, see, this is classic small business in America, 100 employees, would like to be expanding, I presume, like to be increasing the workforce, and yet money's going out the door to pay for 53 junk lawsuits.
Now, I'd like to tell you a little bit about, as these lawsuits have been filed, our defense counsel felt we had a real strong case to get out of these things, and so they made several attempts to contact the plaintiff's lawyers to get us voluntarily dropped. We haven't been able to get a single one of these law firms to drop our case. They just hang us on indefinitely, and nothing seems to happen. In addition, we're only dealing with mainly one law firm and then a couple of others. They've continued to add additional lawsuits against us, so it doesn't appear they have any intention of letting us out. I also would like to add we've made attempts to get the courts to take care of this matter by filing motions for summary judgment, and unfortunately we just haven't been able to get them to hear the motions. They just delay them indefinitely, and so on we go as this mounting problem just continually snowballs for us.
Yeah. Well, this is a case of why frivolous lawsuits hurt our economy. I mean, this is money that they are spending that could be better spent on employee health benefits, expanding the business.
I'd like to mention one other thing. There's some large companies in this industry that over the last 10 or 15 years have moved their operations to China or to Taiwan or to other lesser developed countries to do their manufacturing. I mean, we're one employer that has been fully committed to keeping the jobs in the USA, and this problem we've got now is just totally distracting, let alone if it forces us out of business.
Right. Well, thanks for sharing with us.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President. Ready? Frank Sullivan. Welcome, Frank. Thanks for coming. Where do you live? What's the name of your company? Are you the president?
Yes, sir, I am the president.
Okay. Mr. President.
I first want to thank you very much for your leadership on this issue. It is slowly destroying our country's manufacturing base. I am the president of RPM International Inc. RPM is a business that was founded in 1947 by my grandfather. I grew the business as a family business. He died suddenly in 1971, and my father, Tom, took over the business then. We were doing about $11 million in sales. My brothers and sisters and I grew up in the business, loaded trucks, made paint, cut grass, all the things you do in a family business. Over my father's 40-year career, he retired 3 years ago, he grew our business to $2 billion. We went public. We're listed on the New York Stock Exchange. I joined the business 15 years ago. We were doing $370 million. We had 1,000 employees. Today we do $2.5 billion. We have 8,000 employees. We manufacture in 75 U.S. facilities products like Rust-Oleum, Day-Glo colorants, just to name a few of our paints or sealant products. Our asbestos liability is associated with a small company that we acquired in 1966 for $2 million. This company had a patch and repair product line that was sold in hardware stores that had a 5% asbestos raw material component. and had a 1% or less than 1% market share of its small little product category. We got our first, I should say that we stopped producing that product, took it off the market in 1977. We got our first lawsuits in 1985, and as a public company promptly disclosed them. So the fact that we had this exposure in these lawsuits was widely known amongst lawyers and investors. From 1985 until the year 2000, our total cost for asbestos lawsuits was $2 million, or roughly a couple $100,000 a year. Over the last 4 years, our company has paid out over $200 million in asbestos lawsuit payments. And we ask ourselves, like many of the 8,500 companies that are involved in this, like Bruce's company, what happened? We didn't make any more of this product. We stopped producing it 28 years ago. We weren't newly discovered, and what happened is that our legal system in this area broke. 90% of our claims are from people who are not sick at all, and fortunately never will be. And it's a frustration. Let me give you some economic facts on RPM. Our 8,000 employees have generated tremendous success. Last year, in 2004, we invested $20 million in pension or 401k retirement plans. We invested $30 million in a comprehensive health care plan for our employees. We spent $50 million on new plant and equipment for our factories in the United States. And we dividend out about half of our profits to our 100,000 individual shareholders last year. That was $60 million. In 2004, our asbestos payments exceeded every one of those. We paid out $63 million last year, and it continues to grow. And it is a crisis that is way out of whack with a small hardware store product line that had 1% market share and was a real a $2 million problem over 15 years has turned into a $200 million problem over the last 4.
Yeah. Congress needs to act. I mean, I can't make it any more plainly than to listen to these two stories here. I appreciate you sharing that with us. I guess what happened is the big manufacturers no longer exist, and so these lawyers keep searching and searching and searching until they find medium-sized businesses and small businesses. And it's not right. It just isn't. We want a legal system that works in America. We want people to say, the system is fair. And folks, the system isn't fair right now. It's not fair to those who are getting sued, and it's not fair for those who justly deserve compensation. And I want you to hear the story from Mary Lou Keener. Mary Lou has served our government. She's a public servant, but she's here to talk about her dad.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. I want to thank you for inviting me to be on this panel today, but most importantly, I want to thank you for your pledge here today to keep this issue on the front burner. It is so important. Many of the problems that have been pointed out by you and other members of this panel with the current litigation system were personally experienced by my family. My dad and I were both Navy veterans. I was a Navy nurse in Vietnam, and my dad served as a machinist mate in World War II in the early 40s. During the time that he was in the Navy, he served on 3 different ships. 2 of those ships were literally blown up underneath him. He rowed one of them back to port on the West Coast, where he worked to repair that ship in a naval shipyard. Now, it's well documented that all naval ships, and even ships today, Navy ships, have significant amounts of asbestos used to insulate all the pipes on the ship. So when my dad, as a machinist mate, was down there in the bowels of those 2 ships that were hit, there's no doubt that he was exposed to significant amounts of asbestos during those accidents. That was in the early 40s. In about April of 2001, 50 years, the latency for the development of asbestos disease can be 20, 30, 40, in excess of 50 years. 50 years later, he began to experience some pain under his right shoulder in the back. To make a long story short, he ended up coming, that was April, about June, in the summertime, he came to D.C., he and my mom came to live with my husband and I for a couple months, where he was treated at the National Institutes of Health, the National Cancer Center. And he was diagnosed finally after about 2 months of, back and forth on the Beltway for test after test after test. They diagnosed him with stage 3 mesothelioma. And for those who don't know, mesothelioma is a terminal, deadly disease for which there is no cure.
Right.
My dad decided he wanted to come back home to Michigan. My folks live in northern Michigan. They came back home. He was too weak to undergo chemotherapy, but he did go through 6 weeks of radiation therapy. And it was probably as he would have wanted it if he had the choice, that he died on November 11th, which was Veterans Day of 2001. When you're going through this with a family member, you're not thinking about what kind of compensation is out there to take advantage of. You're concerned about the care and what's going to happen to that family member. But after my dad passed away, because of the fact that in my second life, after being a nurse, I was a lawyer, I helped my mom sort of find her way and navigate through all the regulatory and legal systems that she needed to deal with. And because I was a veteran and had some experience with the Department of Veterans Affairs, I was able to help my mom apply and receive DIC compensation benefits from the VA, which is dependent indemnity compensation, because my dad died as a service-connected veteran. So we took care of that regulatory piece, and my mother received those benefits. About April of 2002, my mother, I took her in, she signed a contract with a law firm to file a tort and a wrongful death claim for compensation for my dad's death, for mesothelioma. Well, as you know, those contracts, 40%, if you go to trial, 40% plus expenses goes to the lawyer. If you settle the case, 1/3 of the award goes to the lawyers plus expenses. That was in April of 2002. It is now almost April of 2005. Nothing, literally nothing, has proceeded on my mother's claim. The reason being, as was already discussed here, that the courts are literally clogged with these cases, clogged with cases that are not cases involving people that are really sick. So here, my dad is already gone. My mother is 80 years old, has had 3 open-heart surgical procedures. She's fading quickly. Who knows what's going to happen if this goes on much longer? She may not even survive to see the end of it. Now, it's been mentioned that many of these defendants in these cases are bankrupt. The lawyers tell me that there were about 60 defendants named in my mother's case. Of those 60 defendants, they tell me that only 7 of them are still actually in business as viable defendants. The rest of them are already bankrupt. Now, my mother has received about 3 small checks in settlement from some of these bankrupt defendants, who end up paying like 5 to 15 cents on the dollar value of the case. So what has happened because of this tremendous logjam, as the Supreme Court talked about in these cases, is that the truly sick, the dying, and in some cases the dead, are not being compensated in a fair or a timely fashion. And, Mr. President, Congress has been talking the talk on this for quite a few years, as you know. And I think that this is the year, with your leadership, that Congress needs to walk the walk.
There you go. Good job. I told Mary Lou, I told you too, that I intend to make this an issue. Starting today, we've made it an issue for the year 2005. And I look forward to working with the Congress to get something done. God bless you all, and thanks for coming.